one of the founders of 350.org?
Climate's the most overarching problem we've ever faced, and at some level it's connected with almost everything else. But the most important thing it's connected with is development and all its different guises. And trying to figure out how to allow people good, decent lives, development, without doing what the West has done is the most difficult question we've ever faced. You know? How to have development without it looking like what it looks like in the West. So clearly one thing that's tied to are fundamental decisions about reproductive decision making and rights and all of that. And it's a reminder of how, in a sense, we need, I think, to start using, instead of economics as the focus by which we look at everything to the world, we're going to need to start looking at the health of the planet as the focus through which we start looking at other decisions. For a very long time, the only question we asked is, will such and such a policy make the economy grow faster or not? And if the answer was yes, we were in favor of it, and if it was no, we tossed it aside. Now we have a more complicated set of questions to ask, and the beauty of asking them is, I think if we answer them in the right way, if we end up with the kind of decisions we need to make about, say, energy, they're also going to help a lot with decisions we need to make in a lot of other places. So, a renewable energy economy is a much more local economy than the one we have at the moment, all right? Because the sun and the wind are everywhere. They're not concentrated in a few places. The rise of local places, the power of local economies in local places allows a whole different development framework than the one we've got now. Instead of the only thing you can do is move to the central city in your country and try to, suddenly there's a possibility for much, you can begin to see this happening in all kinds of ways. I mean, even in the US, in the last 4 or 5 years, the number of farms in the US has actually grown instead of decreased. That kind of age-old dynamic of everybody moving to the big city is beginning to reverse. Things are starting to happen in much more interesting ways that'll have powerful implications for a lot of things, including demographics.
Do you think population and climate change have any kind of relation?
They clearly have a relation. I mean, but that said, most of the warming that we're seeing now is coming from carbon emissions in places where population is essentially stable, but consumption is rising with enormous speed. Okay, you know, people managed mostly by figuring out that educating and empowering women was the key step to take, managed to bend the curve of human fertility in profound ways. I mean, we went from the average woman having 6 kids 35 years ago to what is it now, about 2.6 or something like that, and continuing to fall. That's a pretty remarkable achievement. And as I say, from what we can tell, educating and empowering women was the absolute key factor more than anything else in that change. We don't know kind of what the thing is that will bend consumption curves in the same way. Clearly, in the rich countries, pricing carbon to reflect the damage it does to the atmosphere will play some role in this process.
We have to internalize that.
Yes, exactly. And, you know, I mean, when gasoline went to $4 a gallon, a lot of Americans figured out they didn't need to be driving military vehicles to the grocery store. You know, that was sort of the... but figuring out how we're going to allow people to live, to develop in all the ways we want people to develop and societies to develop without burning coal that's easily accessible in much of the world is the greatest trick human beings will ever have carried off, if we carry it off. And it must be said at the moment there's no great sign that we're carrying it off. I mean, you know, we're clearly losing. But it's a very, very important moment. And the stuff that you guys are doing is absolutely essential to that process. I think the biggest, for my money, the biggest part of this whole discussion is it's almost impossible to carry on the discussion until we get lots and lots and lots of people involved at all kinds of levels, which is why at 350.org we organize in communities in local places all over the world. Hundreds of, we this October we had 7,400 work parties in 188 countries on the same day. And the wider, more broad we can make this movement, and the more kind of people and voices and things that can become involved, the greater chance of reaching the critical mass that pushes us off the fence where we are now. I mean, we're just not making the same progress that we have made in terms of human population.
Right.
So we're basically saying, I mean, you're right that the linkages in terms of what's causing climate change. Population growth is not causing climate change, but it does exacerbate existing effects, and it needs to be part of the solution. And so
Absolutely.
Part of what our goal is to help environmentalists learn how to talk about solutions to population growth, because too often, they don't even really talk about it. It's the elephant in the room, or if it is mentioned, it's sort of like fear or scary, but you don't know how to talk about solutions.
In the West, when people talk about it, it's the whole problem. It's, they're having too many children.
Those people over there are having too many children,
which seems unlikely
as
the cause of the...
And it's not holistic.
Right?
Nice
So we're
work there.
saying,
Very good summary.
So we're saying that any time that we talk about comprehensive solutions, especially to population growth, we have to use sexual and reproductive health and rights, and that rights and justice framework is the key component.
All right,
like
then I'll keep saying it.
Exactly.
For me, the way to say it is sort of education and empowerment.
That is definitely a part of it.
anything specifically for the youth, because of the simple reason that they are obviously driving a lot of they make up the major part of the population.
Well, and they're coming into their childbearing years. And, I mean, I wrote a book years ago called Maybe One, an argument for smaller families.
Right.
And part of the argument was doing a lot of research in America. This book was mostly aimed at the rich world. In America, people generally have 2 children because they think if they don't, their first child will be spoiled. An only child will be a spoiled or sad or whatever child. And it turns out that it's not true, that all the work that we can do statistically or whatever, that only children are just fine. So if there's any advice, if you're planning to have a second kid just because you want company for the first, don't worry about that.
Or adopt.
Or adopt, because there's plenty of people to adopt. Absolutely.